everyone, let's have a seat and get started. I think we've given latecomers enough time to find us, although maybe not to find parking, which I can't say I'm upset about. That it's hard to find parking. So welcome to the Brookline Senior Center and to the first part of our two-part panel discussion on driving retirement. Tonight, our panel of professionals will talk about their perspectives on the issue of driving retirement. They'll talk about how it's important to start planning early and rather than later, and they'll talk about strategies for making your own plans and for helping your loved ones make their own plans. I'd like to thank you all for bravely coming here tonight to hear about this sensitive topic and very important topic. I wanted also to thank BCAN, one of our sponsors. So they've checked you in and they are always looking for new members. So if you are not a member of BCAN, they would love to hear from you. They have some registration forms where you can become a member. They offer an unbelievable amount of support to people who are aging in our area, and the ladies at the back can tell you more about the organization. It's a fantastic organization. TRIPS would not be here if it weren't for BCAN, and we're really grateful for their support, not only for us, but for the whole community. So just a few little housekeeping items. There are bathrooms back here in this hallway if anyone needs the bathroom. Fire exits on the first floor, the front and the back. So the one you probably came in, but there's also one at the back. Please take a minute now to turn off your cell phones or to silence your cell phones. Always a good thing to remember. Tonight's program, we're going to try to keep it to about 90 minutes because I know things run a little late. So we're technically here from 6 to 8, but I'm planning about 90 minutes and then to run a little long, and we waited a little later to start. So the panel here will talk for about an hour, and then we will take some questions. And the way we're going to do that is on your seat, you'll find an index card with a pen. And as the panel is speaking, if you have a question that you would like answered, please write it on the index card. And at some point, one of our volunteers will come around, like near the end of when the panel's going to be talking. One of our volunteers, who are sitting on the back row basically, will come around and collect those index cards, bring them up here to me, and then I'll ask the questions, just to make sure we don't get any duplicate questions and all that. And I'll try to get through all the questions, but we'll try to cover as many as we can in the time we have. You'll also find on your seat a feedback form, and we would very much appreciate you filling out that form. It's nothing too personal, just how you heard about the event and a little bit about your own experience with non-driving transportation. And if you're happy for us to follow up with you, then please let us know at the bottom and give me your phone number and your email address, and I'll make sure you're added to our list. Okay. After we wrap up, please feel free to browse. There are a couple of information tables at the back. You'll find some literature from some of our guests, as well as from various organizations in the community that work on this issue of driving retirement. So let me introduce our panel. First, we have Ann Hollis at the very end there. She is an occupational therapist with Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center's DriveWise program. And if you don't know what DriveWise is, it's a driving skills assessment program. So you can go into DriveWise and they will give you a full assessment and give you some pointers, some tips, some feedback. Sitting next to Ann is Amanda Gasser-Wingate, who is a social worker with DriveWise. So they're here representing DriveWise together. And in the middle here is Dr. Suzanne Salmon. She is the Associate Chief of the Gerontology Division at Beth Israel. And next to Dr. Salmon is Officer Jim Reardon with the Brookline Police Department. He is with the Community Service and Training Division. He works a lot with us here at the Senior Center. And next to Officer Reardon is Michelle Alex from the Registry of Motor Vehicles. She's the Community Outreach Coordinator for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And in front of me is Emily Cool, who is a social worker like myself. She is a case manager at the Newton Council on Aging, and we're very grateful to have her here. TRIPS is actually a joint program between Brookline and Newton, so it's nice to have Newton represented here. So now that you've met all of our panelists and we've gotten all the logistics out of the way, let's get started. So my name is Carrie Ann Tester, and I'm a social worker, and I'm the director of the TRIPS program. For those of you who don't know and haven't read the cover of your program, TRIPS stands for Transportation Resources, Information, Planning, and Partnership for Seniors. We're a fairly new program. We started in October, and we work with seniors who are thinking about driving retirement and exploring their options to driving. So ideally, this is my perspective, driving retirement is expected, gradual, and planned for. That's the ideal world. But in other cases, it might be unexpected, sudden, or potentially devastating for some people. Sometimes it's permanent, and sometimes a person just has to accept that driving is no longer an option. But in other cases, people are looking at alternatives on a temporary basis. We have, I know of people who've had a stroke, they can't drive for a short period of time and have to find other options, and then at some point they're able to return to driving again. Sometimes it's sudden, such as when you have an accident or if you have a change in your health. Other times it's gradual, and this is really, really common. Just this year was not able to pass the eye test at the RMV for the first time, so here I am, I'm starting down the road. I don't drive at night without my glasses. So that's where it starts. It can be very gradual, like with vision loss, or decreased mobility, or decreased flexibility, or cognitive changes that can take years to affect your driving over a long period of time. So we start by voluntarily cutting back on certain types of trips. Like I said, I don't drive at night without my glasses anymore. Maybe we don't drive if the weather's bad, or if we have to take an interstate, we won't drive. Or maybe we just don't drive in areas where we've never been before, we've never driven and we're not familiar with it. These are all very common things for people to do. They just say, oh, I'm not going to drive there because I've never been there before. You hear that a lot. Or I don't know the area, I wouldn't know where to park, right? So the process of driving retirement isn't always sudden, it's not always devastating, it's often very gradual, and it can take a really long time. Sometimes it can take 10 years or even longer. So I hear people say all the time that driving represents independence, driving represents control, driving represents freedom. And these are very positive words that people associate with driving, and we've kind of learned over the course of our lifetime to ignore the negative aspects of driving, independence, control, freedom. But in my view, I see people who driving is their only way of getting around. That's how they get around. And when something happens that they can't drive anymore, they're actually isolated, and they become, so for me, driving can come to represent dependence, limitation, and confinement. So people actually end up being trapped. They don't have any options. So we're predicted to outlive our ability to drive by 7 to 10 years. Many of the seniors we work with find themselves looking down that path towards driving retirement and starting to make plans. While they're still young and they're still driving, they start to add other tools to their toolbox, their transportation toolbox. They start to explore their options, sharpen their skills in those options, use those options, become familiar with those options while they're still driving, so that if driving ever is not an option, or if there's a destination they want to get to that they voluntarily decided they don't drive to, they can still get there. And that's the way we like to think about it, is kind of diversifying your portfolio, just like you do with your retirement portfolio, your financial portfolio. So that's my perspective. So I'd like to start hearing from our panelists now. So I think the first question I'd love to start with is to hear from each of our panelists. When I say the word driving retirement, you may or may not have heard that term. What does that mean to you? So why don't we start with the DriveWise folks? Sorry, they're sharing a mic, so.
Hi, yeah, I'm completely in agreement with what you've been saying, and we look at driving retirement in the same way. There's a very clear path into driving, and people can, sorry, we've got some feedback.
I think you have to point right at you.
Okay, tell me if you can't hear me. I'll just yell if not. So there's a very clear path into driving. People get their learner's permit, they get their license, it's a big celebration, but it's not such a clear path into driving retirement. And this is a difficult path sometimes for people to take. As Kerry-Ann said, people are going to outlive their driving ability. So most of us are going to reach the time when we need to retire from driving. And planning for that and knowing when that time is the key thing. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Amanda.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I think that the other thing with driving retirement is that we know it's going to happen for almost everyone. As Kerry-Ann said, if you know that most people outlive their driving by 7 to 10 years, it's something that is not a potential, it's almost a certainty. And so I think it's really helpful for people to go to events like these or work with people on this panel or others in your community to start planning for it. And as Kerry-Ann was saying, having it be a gradual process. And if we know that driving retirement is going to happen, what we don't know is will it happen gradually in a planned and safe way, or will it happen suddenly or in ways that are not anticipated or not desired. So that for me is the real variable.
Could you hear us?
Yes.
Great, so I couldn't tell.
Dr. Salomon, what do you think?
I don't have much discussion about driving retirement. I find that with the people that I am with, it usually happens suddenly, and usually not voluntarily. Usually it's a family member who will come in and be concerned about their parents or their loved ones' ability to drive. Usually the driver themselves, either they'll realize it and just give it up, or more likely what I see is that people are extremely reluctant to give it up. And so I don't usually see the gradual retirements. I see the crisis retirements.
From my perspective, it's a little different. A lot of times, there's no set age where somebody just loses the ability to drive. It's individual, it's totally medical conditions, a lot of factors that go into it. But a lot of things where the police would get involved is either a family member would call or other officers would come across somebody numerous times and they do a referral. First thing I do is pull up a driving record and see you know, how many times there have been in accidents or they've been stopped for different things. Then you take a look at the car, and if you see dings and all over the car, things, you know, mailboxes in the driveways, things missing. You look at a bunch of different factors where you can make that assessment. You can ask the driver, well, and they have no idea a lot of times why the car was damaged or if something happened. The front end's dinged, the back end's dinged. So it's totally, every time it's a different situation when I have it. It's usually, by the time it gets to me, there's usually a problem that we have to deal with. A lot of times, we cannot take, as a police department, take someone's license, but we can do the immediate threat form to the registry of motor vehicles. And that's what we do, and then they're called in for a hearing, and it goes from there. But by the time I get involved, it's usually pretty bad, and a lot of times it's to the point where something has to be done to prevent them hurting themselves or hurting others. So it's a safety factor.
Thank you, and just to build on what each panelist has said, driving retirement may be a gradual process and it may come as a surprise, but I'd like you to know that the Registry of Motor Vehicles not only issues licenses and registrations and handles housekeeping issues like that, but we also have a safe driving program called Shifting Gears. And it's a free program, and I do see some familiar faces, but it's really preparing for not driving, but also assessing one's driving. So driving retirement entails a lot of factors. It really includes, as was said by Kerry-Ann, not the number of birthdays celebrated, but really what is the physical fitness of the driver and the mental fitness of the driver, because that is truly what determines if someone is safe or not to drive. But one piece at the registry is that what the law says in terms of licensed drivers is that if a person is 75 years old or older, The only way that person can renew his or her license is by visiting in person, going in person to a registry of motor vehicles or to a participating AAA branch if the person is a AAA member. But really that's the only way a person is able to renew a driver's license if they're 75 years or older, is by going in person and passing the eye test that Carrie Ann mentioned earlier. So that's a piece of the puzzle in terms of what the law requires. And the other part of driving is that each and every one of us in this room, of course, Officer Jim, but each and every one of us does have the ability to report someone to the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And I know we'll get into that a little bit later, but if you're wondering, you're sitting there thinking, I am worried about someone, and what can I do? That's one of the answers, that each and every one of us does have the ability to report a person to the Registry of Motor Vehicles. So that's my piece of the puzzle, and I look forward to filling you in a little bit more about the registry side of things.
So when I think of retirement, I'm thinking about the word kind of planning. Usually when you think about, even now at my own current position, I am given information on retirement for when I retire from my job, what kind of finances will I have, what kind of options are available for me, am I going to downsize from my home, all of those types of decisions. And I think when you think about retirement for driving, you have to use the same kind of concepts. What is that going to look like? What are the options available? Who can I talk to? Where can I go? How can I make this work for me? So that we can avoid what Carrie Ann mentioned, that isolation of not being able to drive and not being able to get out into our community as we might have done when we did have a license. So I think that's what social workers at the COAs and through DriveWise can offer assistance to families, is knowing what the options are, what is available to help people get around to avoid that isolation and continue engagement in the community.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. So I think that was a great introduction to the different perspectives and the different roles that these professionals play when dealing with driving retirement. So a couple of follow-up questions that I wrote down just listening to that is, I heard you mention a report and I heard you mention a report. So the public can make a report, a member of the public can make a report, a police officer can make a report, a physician can make a report, I think, right? Are those all three the same kinds of reports? Do they carry the same kind of weight? Does the same process, does it spark off the same process? So,
Sure. Okay. Well, all right.
I'll lead off. In terms of reporting to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, the answer depends on from whom we receive that report. So that's the key. So by law, the registry has to handle a report from, quote, an expert. And what is an expert? Jim, and healthcare provider. So there's really a definition of what a healthcare provider is on our website. And it really ranges from primary care physician to occupational therapist, physical therapist, and I can talk to you after about the 12 different healthcare providers who can report. So if the report comes from a defined healthcare provider or from a police officer, the registry can take immediate action and suspend that license based on the expert report. If the report comes from, say, me, if I'm worried about my family member or my neighbor, I'm not a healthcare provider and I'm not a police officer. I'm a non-expert in the eyes of the Massachusetts law. So in that case, my report would be the same way in writing. So mind you, no matter who we receive the report from, there has to be a name associated to that report. So if the Registry of Motor Vehicles receives a report and there's no name, so if we get an anonymous tip, by law, we cannot respond to that. We need to have a name attached to that report. So if I decide to write a report, let's say on a family member, I write that report, I send it into the registry, I sign my name saying my family member should not be driving, and this is the reason why. The registry will not immediately suspend that person's driver's license. They will send a letter to the driver, to the license holder in question, and in that envelope and that letter is a form for the person to take to their healthcare provider, to their doctor. So we give the driver an opportunity to prove that they're medically fit to operate. So that's how the reporting works. And then, based on what the healthcare provider says, then we can take action. Sometimes the healthcare provider might say, you know what, I'm not sure. I see the patient in my office and I have a good idea of how they're functioning in an office setting, but I don't know how their driving is. So they can request what's called a competency road test at the Registry of Motor Vehicles. And it's a road test. It's pretty much the same road test that a 16, 17, 18-year-old driver would take, but it is it's scheduled a little bit differently, and it really comes because of a healthcare provider requested it. So know that the registry can, based on what we receive in terms of what the healthcare provider says to do, we can either take the license away, or we can request the driver takes a competency road test, or we say, you know what, based on this report from the healthcare provider or from the police officer, the driver's safe to operate. So we handle it a little differently. The key is who is sending in that report and how do we respond. And again, all of that information is on our website as well.
So Dr. Salomon, have you ever had to go through this process as a healthcare professional?
I have, and it is a very uncomfortable situation, because as it says on the paper here, there's something called the conflict of obligation. I actually recently had a 90-year-old, pretty vigorous man who came to me to be his primary care doctor because his other primary care doctor reported him to the Motor Vehicle Bureau, and he wanted nothing more to do with him. So, you know, we are told that whatever goes on in the office stays in the office. It's the beloved patient-doctor relationship, and that your first obligation is to the patient. And now all of a sudden, I hear this story, and of course I think there must have been a reason that the person wanted to report him to the Motor Vehicle Bureau, but what do? I certainly don't want an unsafe driver out there on the streets. On the other hand, you know, I feel terrible because I haven't been in the car with this person, so it's like you say, I don't know what kind of a driver they are. I can ask for permission to speak to their family, but what if he says no? You know, I don't want you involved with my family because they're worried too. So it is, I find that for me to report somebody to the Motor Vehicle Bureau, it has to be pretty egregious. And I say this, having been through this with my mother, who last year at age 92, who, as she told me, was a wonderful driver down in Florida. And at the end of a conversation with her on the phone, she said to me, oh, by the way, I have great news for you. First thing is, I totaled my car. The second thing is, I got a nice big check from the insurance company. They gave me more than the car was worth. So, of course, I'm still stuck back on I totaled my car. And myself wondering, how did I miss this? I mean, was she an unsafe driver? Anybody can have an accident, you know, and be kind of innocent. It can be somebody else's fault. But truthfully, the first accident can be car totaling. Thankfully, nothing happened to her, but it could have been really dangerous. So I think for the primary care provider, it's a very difficult road. you wanna do the right thing for the public and for the driver.
Yeah, I wonder what the other folks in the clinical services, so Emily and Amanda and Ann, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, our role is a little bit different because in DriveWise, people are coming in for a driving evaluation. So we are almost step 2 after they've come to see you, and oftentimes people are referred to us by their PCP or their neurologist. So they're coming in with an understanding that they're here to have a driving evaluation. Now, a point of contention might be what they think the outcome will be, whereas a family member is convinced that they will not pass and they're convinced that they're a very safe driver. But by the time they get to us, they're really sure that they're going to be talking about their driving and their driving safety, not only leading up to this event, but also where they are right at this moment. And so a thing I hear in my office a lot is, look at my record, which we can't do, but look at my record, I haven't had a ticket, I haven't been pulled over, like on my 60-some years of driving. And that's really valuable to know, but is not the absolute full total of the information, because what we're looking at is where are they right now, and where can we predict, to the best of our ability, where we think they'll be moving forward. And do you want to?
No, I think you've done
Okay.
a great job.
So I think I get a lot of clients at different stages of the spectrum. I have family members come in early on, saying, what do I do when this happens? What are the tools? What's available? And I also get them later on when they're like, I don't think my parents should be driving anymore. How do I have that conversation? I have right next to me a tool that I actually use quite often, which was brought in, that we need to talk. And I find this booklet to be very helpful, gives a lot of good tips and a lot of good ways to bring up the conversation. There are a lot of tools that we can use and a lot of options that many of the cities and towns can provide to help with that transportation decision-making piece. So it doesn't have to be an isolating event. I think the great thing about having social services is that the whole family can come in and have a conversation and really kind of work on it together with the help of a social worker on, okay, so if we decide the time is to stop driving is now, what does the city have to offer? What does the state have to offer? Are there volunteer programs? What are the services available? So I see it, I think, even before people often go to DriveWise. I'm kind of oftentimes, hopefully, the first step that people come to learn what the options are. And sometimes I do have to have the difficult conversations with family members about reporting their family member to the RMV, or maybe checking with the doctor to see if there are some kind of any physical or medical concerns that the driver has. And just I think at any stage, it's really important to really just know what the options are and be able to have that conversation no matter how difficult it is, and just trying to be as understanding and empathic as one can be to making that decision.
That's a really tough decision. I think we all appreciate that. So something that Dr. Salomon said about her mom was, did I miss something, right? So I'd like to throw it out, early signs. So we all know if there's a crash or an accident, that's a big sign, right? Total your car. What are some early signs that people might start thinking, maybe I need to start planning, maybe I need to start thinking about this and thinking ahead to the future?
Well, what I do, I always ask, when anybody comes in to see me, I always ask, how did you get here? Which has really opened my eyes to all the different ways of transportation. A lot of people take the ride, people take the taxi. I have one patient who's on a new volunteer that you'll have to talk about, where they paid $20 and the state puts in a certain amount of money too. It's a taxi voucher program. which I thought sounded great but expensive. I think also, I just want to throw in there that there is sometimes ambivalence among the children too, the 50 and 60-year-old children, because on one hand they're worried about their parents driving, but on the other hand, if the parent stops driving, there is obligation then on the children, and a lot of them, you know, can now see that they're going to be driving their parents to whatever. So it's a big change in 2 generations' lives. And I think what you said is very important. It's almost like a cancer diagnosis. You would never give somebody a cancer diagnosis without a plan of what you're going to do next. And so that's why I think it's really important for people to be prepared for all of the options.
Any other comments on early signs?
I know that some things I've heard can be, you know, easily fatigued can be early signs, or, you know, oh, it was just a small ding. I don't usually do that, but it's okay. It was just a guardrail. Things like that, or I only drive, you know, in my own little neighborhood, which is, you know, has its merit, but at the same time, it's a good time to start bringing up the questions and having the conversation of, do you have a plan of what happens next? How do you get beyond your neighborhood if you have a doctor's appointment outside of that? And just, I think, listening and observing people is really the best way to kind of assess and evaluate a person's need regarding driving.
Also, one of the things that is a big alert is if somebody suddenly gets lost, going to a place that they've been to many, many times, going to their local grocery store, going to visit their family, and suddenly they just got lost. So that's one of the first things that sometimes you get alerted to somebody maybe having early memory issues. So then we do something called the mini-cog. It's sort of a screening for memory loss, where you ask somebody to memorize 3 words, and then you have them draw a picture of a clock, of the face of a clock. And, you know, it sounds simple, but you would be amazed how much even a simple clock drawing tells you. So that if the numbers are put on inaccurately, or the hands go on inaccurately, you wonder, how do people see street signs, or, you know, are they judging distance? And so those are big red flags that can lead to early detection of a problem.
Just a quick side question before Michelle starts. Who tends to make those reports of the person getting lost on the way? Is it family, or is it the patient themselves?
Well, I always ask, do you ever get lost? Now, I think a lot of people will say no. And it's definitely helpful when sometimes I'll get emails from the kids, or often they will come in with their parent and will say that they've gotten lost. It's hard to get it from the person. That's my experience.
And I just want to let everyone know that we have a handout. It's the Safe Driver Checklist, and there are plenty of copies at the back, and it lists probably 20 different red flags, warning signs of unsafe driving. So just know that that's available, and this was put together with help from AARP, AAA, the registry, the physicians, and law enforcement too. So it is. It's on the table. Yep.
The simple one too, it's 2 copies.
Yeah, it's on the table back there, and I think Officer Reardon also brought some
It's probably
checklists.
similar. I'm sure it's similar to the same type of things. You know, a lot of times people think the same route they go, they'll miss turns, they'll back up, they're unfamiliar with signs that they see. They can't see the signs very often. You know, night driving is very difficult for people. That's almost the first thing, that when people have a lot of difficulties at night with their vision as they age, things like that. And if you're in a car with somebody, you'll notice these things, that changes that wouldn't have happened 2 or 3 years ago, they're doing now. Things while they're driving that you can make observations of.
So small violations that they didn't used to make.
Yeah.
Okay, so missing signs, okay, yeah.
There has been research on people getting lost, and the consequences can be very serious. There was a research paper by an author called Linda Hunt, who's an occupational therapist who's done a lot of driving research, and she looked at newspaper reports and I think some police reports, and some of the people who had got lost in their familiar neighbourhood had set out to go to the bank, go to the store, ended up hundreds of miles away in rural areas. People no longer had the capacity to adapt to getting lost. And it may be that a road was closed, there was construction, they had a diversion, that sent them off on the wrong way. But this can have very serious consequences, and it is a very difficult thing for anyone to measure. It's difficult for us to measure in our driving assessment. It's difficult for the police officer to measure unless they find
Oh, yeah.
that person.
Bad enough when I'm driving
Lost on
somewhere
the
and I
street.
don't want to go and I make believe I do. My wife's yelling at me, you know where you're going? I'm like, yeah, I know where you're going. I got it.
It's a different issue. Yeah. So, yeah, so any other early signs? I think that's a really good, yeah. So you talked a bit about cognitive issues that you can watch for. Any other medical conditions or medical symptoms that might, like a specific diagnoses that might cause you to think, okay, how is this going to affect my driving?
Well, we always worry about medications, so we've made a big effort to try to get people off of medications that they were put on 20 years ago when those kind of medications were used much more frequently than they are today. Things like Ativan and Valium, and when people have colds and they'll take Benadryl, or for sleep they'll take Tylenol PM, which has Benadryl, which can have a real hangover effect the next day. So we worry a lot about medicines that can make you, almost appear drunk because they're so potent and make people really tired. You worry about blood pressure medications because a lot of times people will take all of their blood pressure medicines in the morning, and then an hour later when the blood pressure medicines kick in, all of a sudden the blood pressure will drop and people can get dizzy. So if you eat your breakfast, take your pills, and then go for a drive, you can be in the middle of driving and suddenly you get dizzy. We worry about strokes. How has it affected your ability to see, to make fast decisions? I think that's what DriveWise, one of the great things that they do is that they can test somebody's reflexes. People who have Parkinson's disease, we worry because often the movements can be a lot slower, so if you're trying to step on the brake really suddenly, that can be an issue.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I wanted to, anyone have anything else to add about early signs before we kind of move on to the planning and preparation phase? Okay, so I wanted to talk about some of the specific ways that seniors can start to plan and prepare. So from each of your perspectives, how can you help? What can you recommend for seniors who, let's say that you've caused some people to think and they think, oh, maybe I should start exploring other options. How can you help? What resources do you either have or know about that you recommend for people if you're concerned about them?
So like I mentioned earlier, I think the sooner you plan, the more information that you gather, all the resources that are out there, the more comfortable you can become with understanding what your options are. And I think that is what makes it easier to make that decision of when and how and what will it look like. I think having a conversation with family can be helpful as well, and maybe even a social worker, just to really, again, it's really about gaining that knowledge and knowing what's out there, knowing who you can talk to, what services are provided through, say, DriveWise, knowing, you can look on AARP, they have a great program online. AAA has a good driving tips and how to have that conversation. So I think, for me, it's about knowing what all the options are, knowing what transportation vehicles are available, whether it's a taxi voucher system, whether it's the ride, whether it's your family member who takes you to various events and medical appointments. So I think it's really just arming yourself with those tools so that you can be prepared and then feel more comfortable with the services that are available.
One question I always like to ask is, where have you driven over the past 48 hours, or a couple of days, and then think about how would you get there if you did not drive. And that's really important to think about, that, okay, where in my daily routine do I go, and how would I get there? And that's a critical question to ask. And I find that I've been speaking for the registry for about 15 years now, so doing these safe driving programs for 15 years. And many times I hear from drivers that they like to hear from their peers, and how do you get around? Maybe someone in their circle has stopped driving, so it's, ask your friends if they're taking the shuttle. And last but not least, in personal experience, the Council on Aging and the elder service agencies are fantastic with trying to identify transportation. And I say that because my own mom had to stop driving. She didn't want to, but she had to. And she reluctantly began taking the shuttle with her Council on Aging. And she, after 2 trips, she really found that it wasn't as bad as she thought it was going to be. And she made a few friends, and she was happy that she didn't always have to pick up the phone and call her kids for a ride, which we never minded. We never minded giving her a ride. We loved the time with her, but she needed that independence. And I have to say the Council on Aging really filled a huge need for her, and I was amazed. So,
Just to build off of what Emily and Michelle were saying, I think there's 2 pieces of information gathering to do. One is to know the resources that are out there, because there are a number of different ones. And the other is to really look into what you use your driving for, because different tasks, different errands, different meetings might require different solutions. And so I really don't believe in a one-size-fits-all thing. There might be a great shuttle for these, several weekly events, and then there's another friend who always goes to this event as well. They'll pick you up, or your child might be available on the weekends only, but during the week it can be spotty. And so finding what are the 5, 10, 15 purposes that you use your car for on a regular basis, and pairing them with whatever resources are available, rather than putting all of your eggs in that one basket, whether it's family, whether it's a local center, whether it's a neighbor. Those, in my experience, those options tend to not go as well because someone invariably is sick or is not available. And our whole purpose here is really talking about maintaining safety and independence. And I think that independence piece is really, if we're going to do that, it has to be a multifaceted approach to driving return.
Could I just add one more, sorry. But also, the Mass DOT, the Mass Department of Transportation, has a terrific link on their website. So I included the website, and I have copies for everyone. But there's something called Mass Mobility, and I'm not sure if everyone has heard of that, but it's part of the Health and Human Services. And there's actually on the website, and this is another good reason to navigate the web, and if you say, I don't know how to use the web, well, this is a great reason to find out. You may be able to find a ride, but you can figure out what is available in terms of transportation from point A to point B, so they can identify for you what some forms of transportation are, and it's through Mass Mobility, and they send out a monthly newsletter too, and they work with cities and towns, but also regional coordinating councils. So it's a far-reaching organization. So.
Yeah, I just want to say it's very different for people in different towns. Here in Brookline, you probably have more resources than some people in more rural areas. So, as well as being an individual decision, it depends what's available in your area, and we can all, sometimes people think about moving because they're planning ahead that they're no longer going to be able to drive, and they live maybe somewhere kind of remote where the only option is to drive or to become isolated. So that's also an early part of the plan of thinking, if I cannot drive, am I in the right place? There's a great researcher at MIT called Joe Coughlin, and Joe always talks about the ice cream test, and that the test of available transportation is, it's a lovely summer's evening, and I want an ice cream. I want to go out and get an ice cream. What can I do? If you drive, you jump in the car, you go to the ice cream store, you get an ice cream. Alternative transportation ought to be able to provide that. The discretionary trips to hospital, to appointments are generally provided for. It's those fun things that are more difficult to plan for, and that's what you really have to think about. Does my network, does what I'm planning, pass the ice cream test?
Any other resources or things that you tend to offer people or point people towards?
The police department, we would just refer to the Brookline Council on Aging.
Okay, yeah. So
My job's to take their license, after that it's Council on Aging.
So if you couldn't hear, he said that with the police, they, refer to the Council on Aging, which is fantastic. We love to hear that.
And we're all in the business of keeping safe drivers on the road.
Yes.
We're talking about planning for driving retirement, but we're not in the business of wanting to take people off the road too early. That's also important. And it's not based on age, it's based on ability. As an example, we recently had a lovely 91-year-old gentleman who came for our evaluation because he thought at my age maybe I should. He's cognitively intact, he goes to his office regularly, his son runs the company now, but he says, I go along and take some messages, see how everybody's doing. He came through our evaluation and did great. So we've had people in their 30s who are not safe to drive.
Right.
So we're not safe looking at you and saying, oh, you're kind of old, maybe we'll take you off the road. That's not the way it should be. That everybody's ability is different, and we should be judging on ability and safety, not on age.
I like that idea of independence. That's definitely how I see it, where, like I said, we voluntarily will cut ourselves off from certain destinations because we don't feel comfortable driving there, but we will drive to others. But think about the destinations you've already cut yourself off from. Like maybe you don't go places in the evenings that you used to go, even though you might like to. You have options for doing that here in Brookline. We are really lucky in that respect. So I like the idea of independence, of exploring other options as adding to your independence. I think that's a great notion. Any other comments on resources? Okay, and I would like to point out that we have, there's an organization called Friendship Works that puts out a booklet of a kind of very basic booklet of non-driving options, and we've got some of those booklets available in the back, so be sure to grab one on your way out. It has a really good variety of different kinds of transportation options. I was trying to, as I was listening, I was kind of counting the ones that I've taken, so it's good to have a mix. We were talking about, so I've walked, I've biked, I've taken the T, I've driven, so it has nothing to do with age. If you live in this area, it's nice to take advantage of all those options that we have.
And recently we've had a few people come along who use Uber.
Exactly. I took a lift here today.
Yeah. How are you getting home from the hospital? Oh, I'm doing Uber.
That's right. Yeah, I had the camera equipment, so I took a lift. Yeah. So it's nice to have those tools in your toolbox, the diversity in your portfolio. I think that's a great way to think about it. Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to ask, just back up a little bit, and in your experience, those of you who've worked with some of these drivers who may be struggling or having problems, what are, in your experience, some of the obstacles that keep them from exploring other options? Because I hear from people all the time, I drive, I'm fine, I don't want to even think about anything else. So what's keeping them from widening their horizon?
I think a lot of people, it's their independence. If you take away their ability to drive, their ability to get around, they've done it for so many years, and all of a sudden, bam, you hit a wall and you're saying you cannot. I I don't think it's a good idea for you to drive at all. It's just pulling that rug from under them, and I think it's just devastating for somebody to even think about. And the reaction you get is not a good one.
Yeah, so just the change, the inertia, the habit.
Yeah.
This is how I get around.
And it's denial that they have a problem a lot of times, that then, you know, there's only an accident, and then you look at the record, they got a lot of accidents, and, but, you know, it's hard to face the facts that things have changed, and change is hard, you know?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
I wanna also say that for a lot of people, there's a deeply emotional aspect to driving. It's much more than getting around, even more than independence, although I think that's a huge part of it. We evaluated a woman who lives in Somerville, a block and a half from a T-stop, and numerous public transit and other options available, and private funds to take Ubers wherever she wanted to go, and it was the idea of not being able to drive was devastating to her, not because it would really limit her independence. I think she passes the ice cream test in every direction she goes, but it was an emotional thing. It was a car that she bought with her money, and it was she told me who taught her how to drive, and it's a lot more than where you go with your car, and I think that causes a lot of people to have a really strong aversion to even meeting with us or meeting with anyone on this panel to talk about it, because the car is a real part of them.
And what I see at the registry is some people are reluctant to give up the license because they think it's their only form of identification, and that's not the case. So know that if a person voluntarily surrenders his or her license and actually mails it in to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, the registry can cancel the license or deactivate the license and issue a free Massachusetts ID card. So that's good to know.
All by mail.
All by mail. But the key is that what needs to happen is the registry needs to receive the physical license. So they literally have to take it out of their wallet, put it in an envelope with a letter. We have a form online that's called a voluntary surrender affidavit. But people write to us all the time saying, I don't want to drive, here's my license, please, give me one of those ID cards. In that case, we can do that. We can swap it out for free. So sometimes people hang on to the license because they think it's their only form of identification, and that is not the case. So keep that in mind too if you're wrestling with someone who doesn't want to give up the license. That's important to know. Everyone needs ID. And the key is the ID that we will issue them has an expiration date now. Years ago, we used to be able to issue an ID for life, and that's not the case anymore. So it's issued just on a 5-year basis, just like the license. So.
And then how do you renew that every 5 years by mail?
You can renew one time. Good question. So the way you renew your ID, you can renew that ID one time online, and then the next time you would have to go in person so we can update your photo. So we can use that same photo for 10 years, and then we would have to update it. So.
And that that ID is pretty much can be used anywhere a driver's license can be used as ID.
Right, just for ID.
And
right, not for driving, but absolutely at the airport, to pick up, to open a bank account or apply for housing. It is a legal document of identification. So that's government issued ID. That's right, according to the Homeland Security Act. Yep, so.
Officer Reardon, have you ever caught anyone trying to drive on one of those? on an
They're
ID?
usually not elders, they're usually younger people.
Teens.